Hi, you guys. Long time no see. I'm Eden Strader, and welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I'm here in the Sapphic studio, Garden of Sapphic Studio. It's finally launched. It's live. We opened for co-working hours this week, and I'm so excited. I literally can't believe it, but that is why I low-key dropped off the face of the internet for a second. And by the internet, I mean YouTube, because I was absolutely blowing up everyone on TikTok with what was going on in the studio. But she's live. She's done. I finally did it. I finally launched her. And by finally, I mean that it took 3 weeks, and I had to make it happen within 3 weeks because I don't come from money and didn't want to pay another month's rent without earning anything. But anyway, it's the beginning of August, and what better way to make my way back onto YouTube than to talk to you about Chicago's biggest event of the summer, which is Lollapalooza. And I need to talk for a second. And I made a TikTok about this, and I knew it would probably get people a little bit riled up because white people especially love to take any sort of racist conversation and topic and make it a little bit about them. But I'm always surprised to the extent that people don't want to acknowledge that racism exists, and it's annoying, and I'm over it. So what we're going to be talking about today is Doechii's unbelievable, unparalleled performance at Lollapalooza and why we need to talk about that in comparison to Chappell Roan. And before you get up in my comments talking about how we don't need to tear one woman down, we don't need to pit them against each other, it's a non-issue, blur. We're not tearing Chappell down. Chappell is an amazing artist. She's incredible. Her drag is amazing. Having her as this standpoint, this person to compare to for the sake of the conversation does not negate how amazing of an artist she is, nor what she has accomplished. It's just good to talk about and have her as a reference point because she is a queer artist. She is one of the biggest artists of our time. And she does drag, which drag originated with Black culture and Black people. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about what's going on specifically in the queer online artist industry, because I think there's a lot to learn and I think there's a lot to talk about. And I think it's really important to talk about the nuance of what we're seeing and this prioritization of white people performing Black art or Black originated art in comparison to Black people comparing Black originated art. Let's start from the top because there is a very distinct reason that I want to talk about this. And to start off the conversation, what I want to start with first is that I went to Chappell last year. I went to Chappell. She broke, for those that don't know, the record of Lollapalooza for the biggest crowd Lollapalooza has ever pulled was for Chappell Roan, which was so incredible. Again, no tea, no shade. We're not coming for Chappell. It was amazing. It was so cool. It was incredible to see, and it still is incredible to see the support and hype that a openly lesbian woman is getting. It's so sick, and she is so talented. And so this year, my favorite artist of all time, Doechii, got announced as well. And they did a very similar thing to what happened to Chappell last year, where they booked Doechii before she got massive. That is what happened with Chappell. And then Doechii blew up, and I was really nervous for the fact that they didn't have her slated as a headliner, because I'm like, she's massive, she's so good. And so obviously I did everything I could to be as close to Doechii for this performance as possible this year. And for the sake of this conversation and not triggering white people, specifically white queer people, I will try my best to motion and say out loud when something is factual versus my own opinion. My own opinion is that Doechii is a better artist, but factually, and this is where I think it's very important to discuss, factually, Doechii is a Black woman that performs very Black art. Chappell is a white artist that performs drag, which originated within Black culture, which we're going to get into. And factually, Doechii did more for her Lolla performance than Chappell did. And let's just break that down for a second, right? And I'll put some links down below of where you can watch Chappell's set versus Doechii's. Doechii's full professionally recorded sets have not gone live. But Chappell was on stage in an amazing costume, right? She was doing some sort of wrestling drag. She had her amazing performers, her amazing backup dancers, also in more athletic wear. And that was the extent of her set setup. I know she had some weights sitting around. I think that was the performance. No, Gov Ball is when she came out in the smoking apple. Chappell does do really incredible things for her set. However, at Doechii, and again, I'm just going to lay out some facts here. We're not going opinion yet. I will tell you when it's my opinion. Doechii had specifically recorded visuals for this set. It was laid out like something of a movie or play where there were different sets, there were different chapters. Those those were announced, those were narrated. There was a sense of narration within that. There was a full, complete record turntable set up and stage. It had slides on it. The record station opened up to an incredible DJ playing inside. She had desks everywhere because we were going to school. That was the entire thing of the play aspect, is like we were in class, we were in detention. Doechii was our teacher. And on top of that, Doechii performed and danced just as much as her backup dancers, which we're not talking comparison yet. That alone is such a feat, and you need to watch her full performance, or at least clips of it, because when I say dancing, I'm not just saying she's doing a little choreographed routine. This woman ran an Iron Man on stage, basically, in front of us. And needless to say, it saved my life, and I will never be the same after it. This is where I want to start talking comparison. And again, this is not because we need to bring Chappell down. This is not because Chappell is bad. This is not because anything is wrong with Chappell. But again, we have these two queer women, and they are both performing art that is originated in Black culture. And when I went to Doechii, I was there for Marina. Marina was first at that same stage, which was amazing because that's one of my all-time favorite artists as well. And so I got to just move up for Doechii. At the same time as Doechii, Clairo was playing across Lollapalooza, who's also an amazing artist. I love Clairo. This is not a Clairo commentary. Don't make this about white people. I noticed as we moved forward from Marina to Doechii, so many white people and white queer appearing people left. And I know my gays, we love Clairo as well, but to me it was such an easy, I have the opportunity to see one of my favorite artists, yes. But when we're talking in terms of the arts and performance, I know Doechii is going to go ham, whereas I believe Clairo, for the most part, just plays the guitar. So to me, it was such an obvious choice, right? Again, we're talking about opinion. I understand that rap is not for everyone, but it was very fascinating to watch so many white queer people leave the presence and leave the stage for Doechii to go see another queer white woman. And in my head, there was absolutely no reason for Doechii to not pull the same crowd that Chappell did. Chappell is amazing. She's groundbreaking. She is an incredible queer woman doing something no one's really ever done before. And that is the same with Doechii, except for Doechii is Black. And her performance was very Black and very heavily influenced by Black culture, which it was so beautiful to watch. Oh my God, it was so stunning. And it just left me with, one, I enjoyed myself so thoroughly, but I think it kind of brought even further to my attention this thing that I've seen in the queer community amongst us white people and us white cis people in general, which is one, a lack of education around our culture and where things originate. I have met many a white queer person who has been out for a very long time and does not know who Marsha P. Johnson is, let alone Sylvia Rivera. And that's always incredibly upsetting for me to hear, because that is such a blatant, obvious example of where queer rights originated and where we really started to be able to show ourselves and be ourselves. And so much of that was pioneered by POC queer people, specifically in the 80s and 90s in New York City. And so there's kind of like this lack of education while also uplifting a form of art, drag, that POC queer people really like originated and built and brought into the limelight and perfected. And we're applauding Chappell because she is amazing. Again, don't get your panties in a rift, but we're kind of like applauding this art form without recognizing where it came from. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of drag, because I think that's really important when it comes to recognizing Chappell and what she's doing and how amazing she is. And while I have my own personal commentary and opinions on Chappell and kind of her lack of political education and commentary, she has occasionally made statements about the fact that like trans women specifically are who inspires her, and as she should. Because let's talk about the fabulous history of drag. This is an article from the BBC. I'm going to link it down below, but I want to kind of talk through a few different points, because drag is massive, right? It's massive for us who are queer and don't talk about the history near enough. So the entire essence of drag did kind of start back in the 17th centuries, you know, when we were doing play, because women didn't really have rights and weren't on the stage. And so men were dressing up as women. So we do kind of start that is technically drag, and where it started is in the 17th century. But what we really see things pick up and start getting recognition and drag really becoming this cultural thing is in the 1970s, 80s, 90s in New York City through ballroom culture, which if you've watched the show Pose, highly recommend if you have not, but that is what it's all about. It is all about the drag and ballroom culture in New York, in Brooklyn, in Queens in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And especially, this is incredibly important to note, that this is during the AIDS pandemic. And so not only were these POC people and queer people and humans facing so much discrimination for one, being POC, two, being queer, being openly queer, doing drag, things like that, but they were also dying and dying rapidly and dying in huge numbers. So it was a really, really dark time in history, especially for the queer community. And that was heightened by everything going on. But despite that, they were creating and perfecting this amazing culture that is ballroom. So let me go ahead and just read this little snippet from the article. They say, anyone who gobbled up the U.S. series Pose in one thirsty gulp will be aware of the drag balls, which originated in parts of New York in the 1970s. These events involved owning the runway in the finest drag around in order to wow the judges and go home with a clutch of trophies. This is where the concept of drag mother took hold. Seasoned queens would take up-and-coming drag artists under their wing to show them how to work a stage as well as their look. They often provided a home to youngsters who may be going through a difficult time in their lives and do not intending to enter the drag world. And so this led to drag mothers being known as the head of their house, making them responsible for an entire drag family. Whatever the mother's surname, their drag proteges were allowed to adopt it or even have their stage name chosen for them by their mother. Drag families feature heavily in the 1990 drag ball documentary Paris is Burning, which inspired Madonna's Vogue, with the house of La Beija, if I'm saying that right, I really hope, among those featured. If you have not done any research into ballroom culture, specifically in this time, again, in New York, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. It's so powerful. It's so impactful. And these drag families and these drag mothers were saving the lives of, one, yes, these other queens and other queer folks, but also, like it mentioned, if they weren't wanting to enter the drag scene, they were just taking kids into their home and teenagers and trying to get them off the streets who had been kicked out because of their queerness or had been diagnosed with AIDS. Like, there was so much going on. It's really, really powerful and really impactful. And I highly recommend researching these things. So then we see the Stonewall riot, right, in 1969. And for those who do not know about Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, those are two trans women. This article lists them as drag queens, and I'll need to do more research personally on if they identified as that. But as far as the research that I have done, they were trans women, which, again, we can go back and forth on the nuance of that, but I'm going with their own definitions of how they identified, which was as women. So they were protesting against the police raids on gay bars in New York City. And this really led to the creation of the Gay Liberation Front. So again, we owe these POC queer people from the 70s, 80s, 90s in New York City our rights. Like, they are who started this, right? Or who originated this. In 2009, that's when we see Drag Race Era. And this is, and actually, I'm just going to read off what they said. It's a mix of challenges, costume creation, skits, and impersonations. Here are some of the drag slang that has sashayed into our lives after featuring on the show. And I think this is also incredibly important to recognize that a lot of modern day vernacular, especially within the queer community, comes from drag, which comes from ballroom. So we have things like throwing shade, read them, realness, sickening, tea, body is tea, face is tea, serving tea, can also just be like tea gossip. And what I love about this is, like, yes, this is such queer vernacular, also like really moving into mainstream vernacular. And we're seeing that with slay. And it's just important that we recognize where that comes from. And it does not come from white TikTokers. So now that we've talked a little bit about drag history and what it is, hopefully you can see how important it is that we recognize that Chappell is performing an art form, and she's doing it amazingly. Again, let's not get worked up. She is performing amazingly an art form that originated with POC queer people. And that's so important to recognize, that we are really platforming and giving recognition, yes, to Chappell as she deserves. However, this is where we get into Doechii. And this is not a let's bring Chappell down. Chappell needs to be dethroned. It's either Doechii or Chappell, because it's not. However, it is blatant and it is obvious, and we can see that Doechii does not get the recognition nor the crowds in the same capacity as Chappell. Her crowds are not small. She just won a Grammy, as she should. She's getting a lot of recognition. It's not me saying that doesn't exist. What I'm saying is there is something to be said about the fact that we would rather see a Black art form, or we are uplifting a Black art form performed by a white woman more than we are uplifting a Black art form uplifted by a Black woman. And I think that's just something that people need to be aware of, and that we as white people also need to kind of unpack and just like where that is coming from. Sometimes when we talk about race commentary as white people, we tend to be like, oh, if I'm not doing it perfectly, that means I'm guilty. You're saying I'm a bad person. You're saying I'm racist. No. We, especially in America, which is where I will lead this commentary because I'm American and this is the culture in which I know well, we tend to take commentaries as a personal attack when it's not a personal attack on you. It is an attack on the systemic racism that we benefit from, that you did not build, but you may be subconsciously upholding it. And that's why it's so important to just check in and have conversations like these and educate yourself, right? I think a huge thing that we can see with this is Billie Eilish's style, right? We all love her style. Oh, it's so cool. It's so 90s. Who invented that style? Black people have been dressing and appearing like that and wearing grills and wearing these amazing outfits for as long as I can imagine, at least since the 90s. However, they have been receiving flack and they have been on the short end of the stick with racism when it comes to their appearance. Whereas as soon as a white, beautiful woman such as Billie Eilish wears it, we're all obsessed. And so like, it's just these little things, right? We need to pay attention to, we need to make sure that we're recognizing, because, and this is where I got worked up on TikTok, is like, this is basically just a longer version of what I post on TikTok. And of course, multiple white people come in being like, forced racial issue, this is not an issue, you're forcing this, Doechii's amazing, like blah, 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 blah. We don't need to pit women against each other. And it's like, so all I'm saying, the TLDR of this entire video and the TikTok itself, is that we need to credit the cultures that invented art forms, especially as white people utilizing those art forms. Because it's not fair that because we are digestible to the public and systemically prioritized as white people, so naturally we're going to get props for doing new quirky thing, when in reality it is something that POC people have done forever and gotten a lot of slack for. And so it's so important that like the least we can do with our privilege is educate ourselves on where these things come from and educate others on where it comes from and where it originates with, right? Like, and like I am learning and unlearning every day. And so I'm sure there are things that I have said within this video that are not perfect. And I'm always, though it is not people of color's job to educate me, I am always open to CC or resources that I can learn more. But I really just feel it's important to talk about this because Doechii, oh, she killed it. She really did kill it at Lollapalooza, you guys. And as soon as that professional recording goes live, I really do highly recommend you go watch it, because from an artistry standpoint, right? I grew up in the arts, so I have a lot more opinions on this, I think, than the average person. But like, from an artistry standpoint, Doechii truly unparalleled. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I just have never seen anything like it. It was absolutely unbelievable. And it deserved just as much recognition as Chappell did last year at Lollapalooza. And in my opinion, I guess, again, my opinion on my page that I built, should have deserved more. So that's on that. And yeah, I can't wait to see what Doechii does next. She just announced her tour. I will be doing everything in my power, including selling off a arm if I must, in order to be there when she comes to Chicago. She's amazing. Support Black artists, credit Black artists, credit Black history. It is so absolutely important. It is the least we can do as white people. It is actually the lowest lift possible. Okay, love you. Bye.